What if I told you the American empire is collapsing, and your leaders are too afraid to say it out loud? Today, we are breaking down economist Richard Wolff's explosive lecture on what it means to live through the decline of an empire. From zombie corporations and imperial wars to tariff smokescreens and global shifts in economic power, Wolff delivers a sobering, unfiltered diagnosis of where the United States is headed, and why nobody in power wants to talk about it. We'll explore why America is losing wars it pretends to be winning, how tariffs are shielding corporate profits instead of protecting jobs, why China and India are outpacing us, and how economic myths are used to squeeze the working class. The American empire is declining, and we're in denial. Empires don't decline overnight, but when they do, the signs are everywhere. Only the citizens at the center are too deep in denial to see it. Richard Wolff opens his lecture with a bold and unsettling truth. We are living through the fall of the American empire. But unlike the empires of the past, this one refuses to admit what's happening. The people in charge are silent, the media offers distractions, and the public is kept pacified with myths of eternal dominance. The United States, Wolff reminds us, has now lost 4 major wars: Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq, and Ukraine. Each defeat is rationalized, buried, or reframed to protect the image of American invincibility. Our cultural narrative insists we only win, that we're the global good guys who always land on top. But reality tells a different story. In each of these conflicts, the US entered with overwhelming confidence and left with strategic failure, human cost, and political embarrassment. These are not isolated incidents. They are symptoms of an empire stretching beyond its means. Meanwhile, the rest of the world isn't standing still. The BRICS nations, once dismissed as second-tier players, now represent over half of the global population. They're forming their own trade blocs, producing competitive technologies, and asserting geopolitical influence. While the US accounts for just 4.5% of the world's population, it continues to behave like it controls the other 95%. That disconnect is both dangerous and delusional. What's most disturbing is the leadership vacuum. Wolff points out that no American leader, Democrat or Republican, dares utter the word decline. To do so would require honesty, humility, and a complete shift in national priorities. Instead, we get empty slogans, bloated military budgets, and policies built on nostalgia. The empire is falling, but we've been trained not to see it, and punished if we try. Tariffs, BYD, and the protection racket for American corporations. In theory, tariffs are supposed to protect national industries and preserve jobs. In practice, they often serve as a corporate protection racket, shielding domestic giants from real competition while burdening everyday consumers and producers. Richard Wolff uses the example of electric vehicles to illustrate how this works, and the results are both revealing and damning. 15 years ago, every major automaker realized the gas-powered car was becoming obsolete. The future was electric, so they all jumped into the race. But one company won, and it wasn't American. BYD, a Chinese automaker, emerged as the global leader by doing what capitalism is supposed to reward: building better, cheaper electric vehicles. They deliver high quality at a price that undercuts Tesla, Ford, and GM. And yet, most Americans have never even heard of them. Why? Because the US government slapped a 100% tariff on Chinese electric vehicles. That means if BYD sells a car for $30,000, an American buyer has to pay another $30,000 in taxes just to import it. No business or individual wants to pay double when they can buy a Tesla or Ford EV for slightly less, even if it's an inferior product. And that's the point. The tariff isn't about innovation or progress, it's about eliminating competition to protect domestic profits. This move props up companies like General Motors, which would otherwise be outclassed in a fair market. And the justification? Protecting American jobs. But Wolff exposes the lie. These tariffs don't protect workers. They protect shareholder dividends and executive bonuses. Meanwhile, small business owners and independent contractors who might want the most affordable and efficient electric trucks are forced to buy more expensive domestic models just to keep up. It's a lose-lose for the American people. We pay more, we get less, and we fall further behind, all while being told we're doing it to beat China. In reality, we're just blocking the better product and lying to ourselves about why. Zombie corporations and the debt spiral. Behind the patriotic rhetoric and economic pageantry lies a decaying reality that most Americans are never told about. Our economy is crawling with zombie corporations. Richard Wolff doesn't use the term lightly. This isn't metaphor, it's an actual designation in financial circles. A zombie corporation is one that no longer earns enough profit to pay off its debt. It survives not by thriving in the market, but by taking on even more debt to service the existing one. It's economic necromancy, sustaining the dead through increasingly desperate financial injections. This wouldn't be possible in a functioning competitive economy. But in a declining empire, desperate to maintain the illusion of prosperity, zombie companies are not only tolerated, they're the new normal. These entities, which often include major firms you've heard of or even buy from, are artificially kept alive because letting them fail would reveal just how fragile the economic foundation truly is. What's more disturbing is who enables this. The biggest creditors of the US are not patriotic investors but foreign governments, Japan and China being the top two. That's right, while America saber rattles against Beijing, it owes the Chinese government nearly $1 trillion. Every time you pay taxes, a slice of your contribution is funneled back to China in the form of interest payments, money that can then be used to bolster Chinese infrastructure, military, and industry. It's a cycle that undermines American autonomy while pretending to reinforce it. And yet, we're told we're still the economic leader of the world. Wolff highlights the absurdity. If your survival depends on borrowing from your rival, are you really the one in charge? This is how decline plays out, not in cinematic collapse, but in structural rot, disguised by stock market highs and inflated GDP figures. Zombie corporations are just one face of the debt spiral we've chosen to ignore. How inflation is manufactured to squeeze workers. Inflation is often presented as a mysterious natural force, like a weather pattern we just have to endure. But Richard Wolff tears that illusion apart. Inflation, he argues, is not some random economic storm. It's a deliberate decision made by corporations to increase prices, knowing full well that ordinary people will have no choice but to pay. And the kicker? The people who raise prices are never the ones who suffer from them. Wolff cuts through the jargon. In a capitalist economy, only employers, those who own and control businesses, get to set prices. You, the worker, are never invited into the room where those decisions happen. You don't get a say in how much the goods you make, transport, or sell will cost. So when prices rise faster than your wages, that's not an accident, it's policy. It's how profits are maintained when productivity alone can't do the trick anymore. And when prices soar, what's the official solution? Raise interest rates. That's the playbook. But raising rates only compounds the pain for working people. It makes your credit card bills heavier, your mortgage payments steeper, and your chances of getting out of debt slimmer. Rich people don't care. Interest rate hikes don't touch their wealth. But for average households, it's death by 1,000 cuts. Higher interest doesn't just reduce your purchasing power, it chains you to the very system squeezing you dry. Meanwhile, Wolff reminds us there are historical alternatives, ones the establishment conveniently forgets. When inflation raged in the 1970s, President Nixon imposed a wage and price freeze overnight. It worked. Inflation stopped. But such interventions are now politically impossible because they interfere with the sacred right of corporations to profit at any cost. Inflation then becomes a tool, not to stabilize the economy, but to discipline the working class. It redistributes wealth upward while blaming the victim. You're told to tighten your belt while corporate boards give themselves raises. And all the while, media pundits act confused about where the inflation came from, when the answer has been staring us in the face the whole time. The myth of American exceptionalism in war and economics. At the heart of American identity is a dangerous myth, one that Richard Wolff shreds with brutal clarity: the belief in American exceptionalism. The idea that the United States is inherently different, destined to lead, and incapable of failure. But when that myth is confronted with the hard reality of military defeats and economic stagnation, it doesn't just collapse, it turns toxic. Wolff walks us through the pattern, A superpower that once dictated the rules is now floundering in conflicts it cannot win. The war in Vietnam ended with helicopters fleeing rooftops. Afghanistan, after 20 years, saw the Taliban return to power within weeks of the US withdrawal. Iraq remains destabilized. Ukraine, once sold as a front for Western resolve, has become a quagmire of attrition. These aren't tactical stumbles, they're structural signs of decline. But instead of acknowledging this, the political establishment doubles down on the myth, telling Americans that losing is actually winning if you frame it just right. And it's not just the wars. The economic tools America once wielded with confidence, like sanctions, have become blunt, ineffective weapons. The strategy to isolate Russia economically after its invasion of Ukraine backfired spectacularly. Instead of collapsing, the Russian economy adapted. They redirected exports to China and India, strengthened BRICS alliances, and watched the ruble stabilize. Meanwhile, American inflation worsened, and energy prices spiked in Europe. In trying to punish its adversary, the empire simply exposed its limits. This is what happens when myth overrides strategy. Believing you're the exception to history doesn't stop history from happening. Other empires believed it too: Rome, Britain, the Ottomans. All of them declined when they began mistaking privilege for permanence. Wolff doesn't just critique America's failures. He shows how our belief in eternal dominance blinds us to the changing world order. While China grows at 5% and India at 7%, we're told to celebrate a modest 2.7% as leading the world. That's not leadership, that's delusion. The rest of the world sees the writing on the wall. It's only here, at the empire's center, where the story of decline still masquerades as triumph. The corporate war on unions and the long squeeze of labor empires don't just collapse from outside threats, they rot from within. And Richard Wolff is clear about one of the most deliberate and devastating internal strategies in the American decline: the systematic war on labor. For the past 4 decades, corporate America has waged a quiet but brutal campaign to dismantle the power of working people, primarily by crushing unions. This wasn't an accident. It was a calculated move to make the working class easier to control, cheaper to employ, and less capable of resisting exploitation. Unions were once a cornerstone of economic fairness. They gave workers a voice, a seat at the table, and the power to bargain for better wages, benefits, and conditions. But starting in the late 1970s and accelerating through the Reagan era, they were demonized, weakened, and slowly stripped of their ability to function. Politicians, pundits, and corporate lobbyists portrayed unions as corrupt, inefficient, and outdated, despite the fact that they were often the only institution standing between workers and corporate greed. As Wolff points out, this long-term attack on labor was not just about breaking up specific unions, it was about eroding the very idea that workers should have any collective power at all. The result? A generation of Americans entered the workforce with no memory of real labor victories, no expectation of rights, and no understanding of solidarity. Wages stagnated, benefits disappeared, job security became a joke. And when the inevitable crises hit, like the 2008 crash or the inflation shock of the 2020s, working people had no protection left. But there are signs of a resurgence. Wolff highlights the growing labor unrest at companies like Starbucks and Amazon as signs that something is changing. Workers are waking up. They're beginning to see through the decades-long gaslighting that told them unions were the problem. In reality, the lack of unions is what made it so easy to squeeze them dry. Still, it's late in the game. The empire is already in decline, and workers are organizing while the house is burning. But Wolff is hopeful in a realist's way. The return of labor consciousness might not save the empire, but it could help the people survive its collapse. Because, as history shows, when the elites offload the costs of decline, it's always the working class that bleeds first and hardest. Manufactured scarcity and the market's moral failure. There's a certain elegance in how Richard Wolff tears down the mythology of the free market, not with jargon, but with moral clarity. In this section of his lecture, he exposes one of capitalism's dirtiest secrets. Scarcity isn't always a natural condition. It's often manufactured, manipulated, or exacerbated for profit. And when that scarcity hits, the market doesn't ration by need. it rations by wealth. The more money you have, the more access you get. If you're poor, you're simply out of luck. Wolf brings this to life with a deceptively simple example: an ice cream stand in the park. Imagine a summer day where there are only a few cones left. A working-class parent offers a couple dollars to buy a treat for their kids, but someone richer comes along and offers more. Who gets the ice cream? The answer is obvious, and that's the point. The market always favors the one who can pay more, even if their need is trivial and the other person's need is urgent. That dynamic doesn't just apply to ice cream. It applies to housing, medicine, food, water, and fuel. During times of war, disaster, or economic downturn, this market logic becomes brutal. The rich get everything they want, and the poor get to watch prices climb out of reach. This isn't efficiency. It's engineered inequality, and it's often celebrated as freedom of choice. Scarcity, as Wolf argues, isn't always real. Sometimes it's created by limiting supply on purpose, restricting production, or hoarding goods to drive up prices. In other cases, it's the result of shifting public resources to war efforts or corporate bailouts. Whatever the cause, the outcome is the same. Those at the top secure even more, while the rest scramble for less. Wolf's critique strikes at the heart of the moral failure embedded in our economic system. If your access to life's essentials depends not on your humanity, but on your purchasing power, then the system doesn't serve society, it serves profit. And when times get hard, it's not the market that steps up to protect people. It's the people, organizing outside of the market, who fight to make life livable again. Trump, denial, and the spectacle of political theater. In the final stretch of his lecture, Richard Wolff turns his attention to the spectacle that dominates American political life, a drama that centers on personality, outrage, and tribal loyalty, while carefully avoiding any meaningful discussion about the structural collapse unfolding beneath it all. And at the heart of this spectacle stands Donald Trump, the figure Wolff calls a symptom, not a cause. Trump isn't a break from the system. He is what the system produces when it's in decline. When working people are squeezed, when real wages fall, when unions are destroyed, and when economic security becomes a thing of the past, people don't just suffer, they search for someone to blame. And Trump offers them a villain: immigrants, minorities, foreigners, globalists. He doesn't solve the problems, but he performs the anger. He becomes the avatar of outrage in a society that's running out of hope. Wolff doesn't let the Democrats off the hook either. They had their own different figure in Bernie Sanders, a candidate who spoke to economic pain, who didn't run from the label socialist, and who could have potentially redirected the rage into a collective movement for economic justice. But the party closed ranks and shut him down. Instead, they've spent years offering centrist tweaks to a system that's fundamentally broken. And so, the American people are left with theater. Political leaders posture and insult one another, while the machinery of empire crumbles. Millions are deported, tariff wars are launched, and new conflicts are stirred, not because they make sense, but because they create the illusion of control. Trump threatens mass ICE raids while simultaneously destroying the Mexican economy through tariffs, creating a humanitarian crisis that circles back into the US through more migration. It's chaos masquerading as strategy. Wolff's message here is crystal clear. Don't get distracted by the circus. What Trump says, what Biden says, none of it matters if the empire's structural conditions remain unchanged. The American decline isn't a partisan issue. It's economic, systemic, and global. And focusing on the noise only ensures we miss the signal. Richard Wolff doesn't deliver comfort. He delivers clarity. His lecture isn't a partisan rant or a conspiracy theory. It's a diagnosis of a system in crisis, an empire in decline, and a public locked in denial. The signs are everywhere: endless wars with no victories, zombie corporations swimming in debt, tariffs shielding corporate incompetence, inflation engineered to crush workers, and a political class that offers theater instead of solutions. This is what decline looks like, not with explosions or collapse, but through rot from within. While the rest of the world builds, adapts, and moves forward, America clings to myths. We tell ourselves we're leading the global economy while being outpaced by nations with double our growth. We say we're protecting jobs with tariffs while actually protecting corporate profits. We talk about freedom while crushing unions and pricing basic necessities out of reach. And we pretend the market will solve our problems, even as it rewards wealth and punishes need. Wolf's final warning is not just about economics, it's about truth. If we can't be honest about where we are, we can't even begin to imagine where we need to go. And until we recognize the system for what it is, a structure built to concentrate wealth, disempower labor, and deny accountability, we'll keep repeating the same cycles under different names. So now the question is yours. Do you believe this is all just a rough patch? Or are we witnessing the managed decline of an empire too proud to admit it? Let me know what you think in the comments. Have you seen signs of this decline in your own life or community? If this breakdown opened your eyes or challenged what you've been told, hit like, share this video, and subscribe for more deep dives into the real forces shaping our economy. And if you're ready to break through the noise of corporate media and get honest economic analysis, this channel's just getting started. Thanks for watching, and stay critical.